ream of the brick, the little door, like ribbon, flat place to come out. One splits into two. They'll come 3D, very deep. Invites them in, but then we tell our story.
You're going to stay here forever.
Tiny leg for the ghost girl #1.
The other mothers. She's got this whole other world where everything's better. My name!
People have brought love and passion and enthusiasm into this project, and you see it in every frame of the film.
All right. I'm Peter DeBruge, chief film critic and open animation lover. I'm among my people for Variety magazine. It's hard to believe that this precocious, cobalt blue-haired young woman is now 15 years old. Originally released in 2009, the film was part of a stop-motion revolution. And here at Annecy, you have the chance this evening and again later in the festival to be the first to see a remastered stereoscopic 3D version of the film. And that is the occasion for which we've gathered together these three incredible talents. Let me introduce my fellow panelists, starting on the other end. We have Oliver Jones. He's director of practical effects at Laika.
Bonjour.
I forgot to say, all of their responses will be in French. I hope you're bilingual. None of them will be. Brian McLean, director of rapid prototyping.
Hello.
That's a title that meant nothing to us 15 years ago, and now Laika has changed the industry. And Jeff Stringer, chief technology officer at Laika. All right, Jeff. I'm going to start with you. One of the things I love about what Laika does, when you look at it's kind of everything you've done has been kind of concurrent with the computer animation, kind of renaissance that we've enjoyed for the last 25 years, 30 years. But because you're doing it practically, because you're incorporating that technology into stop motion, I think there's a way that like what we've seen here, now 15 years later, 100 years from now, we look at these movies and there's a timelessness to them. That's really what I want to kind of start by asking you is like, why do you think that Coraline has stood the test of time?
Well, I think Coraline certainly has become an animation classic, there's no doubt. And I think that's primarily because of its just pure originality. I don't think anyone had seen a film quite like it when it came out in 2009. The story, the design, everything about the film is just so unique. And having rewatched it again recently, I'm struck also by just how innovative it was. Technically, that's kind of the thing I tend to focus on. There were many firsts in this film for stop motion generally. And one of the big ones was the use of stereoscopic 3D, which is what this re-release is all about.
Do you want to explain that for us? It is key that a lot of movies were coming out in 3D at the time, but Coraline sort of experimented, innovated something. Tell us how.
Right. It was the first stop motion feature to be shot for stereo for 3D, and that was all very intentional. It was very creatively driven by Henry Selick, who wanted to bring the viewers into this world, this miniature handmade world that we had built out on our stages. To do that, there was actually kind of a trick. It was the key to this illusion, which was to shoot it in the proper scale, because otherwise a viewer would feel like a giant among these puppets, and we wanted the viewer to be immersed in this environment. And so to shoot in proper scale for puppets, whereas normally when you do a stereo film, you would shoot with a 2-camera rig with the cameras kind of, rigged together at approximately the distance between a human's eyes. But what we wanted was to shoot it at approximately the distance, left and right eye, of a puppet's eyes, which is a very small and precise distance that any variation of that would create a big difference in the depth perception for the viewer. And so Pete Kozacek, the DP, worked with our camera crew to develop this motion control device that was essentially just a slider that you could mount a camera on and move the camera that tiny distance from left to right while the animator captured the animation. It's something that you can do in stop motion, this single camera technique, because the puppets aren't going to move between exposures. But it allowed us to get things in proper scale, and it also allowed us to do it very, very repeatably, very, very reliably. So a lot of attention and time was spent developing the way to use 3D to match the story beats in the film. And this little motion control innovation allowed our camera crew to capture that very reliably, as Henry intended it.
So right there from the first film, Coraline, you guys were thinking outside the box in terms of technology. How did that sort of impact innovations within the studio going forward?
Yeah, it's continued. I mean, I think Coraline was Laika's origin story in every respect. We've come a long way. We're doing a lot of things, but everything we do today got its start with the experience of making Coraline. I think that little motion control innovation, I mean, the crew in camera and in rigging continued to develop movers for just about everything imaginable in the frame. That's Ollie's team, and those guys have built custom rigging for the environments and for subtle movements within the puppets. And it's one of those things I think that separates Laika's films. When you're watching it, you see the environment is alive in ways that just aren't typical in a stop motion film.
So to reiterate, the version we're seeing today and that will be seen in theaters again is not different. It's remastered. It was made in 3D. What did remastering it allow you to do?
Well, first of all, I think the intention was to make sure that this animation classic was not going to change. It was the film, we remember it, and we the first intention was to make it the film that you recall. But with this kind of work, doing stop motion, there's a ton of things in the frame to clean up, and you always wish you had more time. I think you never final a shot. You're just told to stop basically. And the crew that did the remastering, led by Steve Emerson, who's our visual effects supervisor, he was also the compositing supervisor on Coraline originally. And he was grateful to have that more time to spend on each frame, each shot. And not only more time, but the benefit of 15 years of technology and tools and the ability to see artifacts that just really would have gotten past us in 2008. I think we were using a compositing package back then that some of you may recall called Shake. It was discontinued by Apple during the filming of Coraline. And so, yeah, it was great to be able to go back and look at every shot. And, it's not just the artifacts and things that you can see with, ultra high resolution or UHD displays now, but also the mastering of the mats from left to right eye. Back then, there were no tools for cleaning that stuff up. It was all done very manually. So what you're going to see if you see the film tonight is not just the film you remember, but I think the film that was intended in beautiful 3D.
Brian, I'm going to switch the conversation over to you. How is the studio scaling up now based on the innovations that you guys came up with for the newly remastered 3D?
In many ways, one of the other firsts on Coraline that Jeff didn't get to mention was the fact that Laika was the first studio to try to take this crazy idea of using 3D printing for replacement animation. Henry Selick had directed a couple stop-motion films before Coraline, one of which was Nightmare Before Christmas. And Jack Skellington was very emotive. He had over 800 hand-sculpted faces. So the idea was to basically take this replacement animation technique and see if we could harness the power of this new fancy computer technology animate faces in the computer, and then send them to one of these emerging 3D printers. So the idea was to try to really bring bring stop motion into the 21st century by fusing it with this latest technology that we could. And back then, we had no idea how challenging it was going to be. I remember telling the producer that all we needed was 3 people, 1 3D printer, and $30,000, and we could make Coraline for him. I was not trying to be deceitful. That's really what I thought, because at the time, Jack Skellington had 800 faces. So I did the math, figured out how many Coraline faces we'd need. We need maybe 900 to beat Jack Skellington, and then we'd be good. And we very quickly realized that this was not going to be easy. And looking back, I recognize how lucky we were, because for months and months and months, we literally sat in a closed office with doors shut, where we failed test after test after test. And if it wasn't for the trust in Laika leadership and Henry Selick, this process would have never left that office, because it took us months of failing before we finally succeeded. And along the way, we came up with all these crazy ideas that we thought were so ingenious. One of them was this idea of Coraline had 5 freckles on one side of her face and 5 freckles on the other side. And those freckles needed to move as she talked and as she emoted. So we had little tiny holes in her cheeks that were just deep enough, because these printers were so precise, that once we printed the faces, and they came out of white like this, once we printed them and then we primered them gray and then we painted them skin tone, there was just a little indentation of where a painter would have to go and hand paint each individual freckle. We thought we were really smart, and then at one point Henry said, hey, I think Coraline should be asymmetrical. Maybe we can add a 6th freckle on the other side of her face. Well, wait a minute. No, we have just budgeted for 5 freckles on each side of the face. We can't add another one. But the technology was so impressive, and we were really excited with how we could breathe life into a little 10-inch puppet.
So you guys were really innovating alongside the animation in this movie. Like, how is the sort of facial animation evolved over the course of the subsequent features you've made at Laika?
Yeah, with each film, we have tried to look at whatever technology is going to help us tell the story. And on Coraline, it was all about sort of figuring out the process and deciding whether or not it was going to help. And it certainly did. It helped push the emotional range of a stop-motion character to a whole new level. But at the time, it was still limiting with what it could do in terms of color. Because as I was saying, you had to be very specific about where you were going to paint features on a character's face. So on the 5 films that Laika has produced, we've actually swapped out the 3D printing technology 4 different times. And we've continued to try to figure out what printing technology is going to be perfect for each story, including now doing full color printing on our latest film, Wildwood, which is very exciting. And to put it in some numbers, Coraline, we printed 20,000 faces for the entire film. Missing Link, we have a world record for the most number of 3D printed faces in a stop-motion animated film. Not many other people are competing in that category, but we got the world record for 106,000 faces, and then on Wildwood, we're far surpassing that.
Wow. Ollie, your turn. So that really helps us understand all the innovation that's gone into these films. One of the things that makes stop motion special and what Laika does is that in addition to the technology, you can really feel like the hands of the artist in every frame. Would you tell us a little bit about that aspect?
So it's really important to the studio and to the movies that we make that you feel the artist, and you feel the artist's hand in everything that you see. It's a big part of our ethos. It's a big part of the experience. And we've been using this, same technology for many, many years now. And we've been kind of really concentrating on making sure that, it's a pretty, attainable process, stop motion. It's 24 frames a second. It's real, real objects under light. And so we want to really bring that audience into the process. And back when we were making Coraline, it was a very traditional version of stop motion. We had, foam latex bodies. We had sets that were made out of, chipboard and kind of wood. But we also really was concentrated on using found elements, which really helped the artist kind of start acknowledging the ordinary as extraordinary, which kind of like mirrored what Coraline was experiencing during the movie as well. So it's a big part of our process, a big part of our identity, is making sure that the artist's hand is always represented in every frame that you see on the movie.
So if you've seen a Laika movie, you know one of the sort of greatest pleasures is you've enjoyed the film, and there in the end credits is kind of a look at just that incredible process, kind of in time lapse where we see it going on. What have you kind of discovered about fans' interest in the behind the scenes? I mean, because in one sense, there's the magic of what we see on screen, but there's a whole other magic of kind of like us wanting to know more about the process.
Well, because I think it's attainable and you can somewhat understand it. I mean, many people here may have downloaded an app and tried stop motion at home. The process exists in the artist's mind as well as the viewers. So that's a pretty unique. So when Coraline is going down the tunnel and going into the other world, she's kind of experiencing what it's like to kind of peer behind the curtain at, in an animation studio, or to go in one of the departments. So it's very much akin to what we're doing on stage is the experience. I think that really brings people in. It's kind of like the world has, been taken over by magic, and and you're experiencing something quite extraordinary. When Coraline walks into the magic garden, we're not just experiencing the awe of the imagery, we're actually trying to kind of, unlock how the trick is done. We're trying to, work out how it's done, but we're also wanting to believe at the same time.
Yeah, there's this kind of double, triple pleasure sometimes. I always think too with the way you guys do it is, it's got to be the most labor-intensive stop motion that exists, because you're kind of making the faces in CG in advance, printing them out, painting them, then animating them. Which takes it takes how many hours, days to do a second of screen time?
What's our current quota? It's like
3.5
seconds a week.
God.
Yeah.
And you've got multiple stages going kind of like at once, so that I guess kind of like helps it out. And but you've also you're doing it on ones, on twos, like Laika, it's on ones, right?
Ones, yeah.
Yes.
I think it's important to point out that we're not driven by efficiency.
No.
That is
Quite
not
the opposite.
It's not one of our core values.
I mean, this is the most masochistic studio on earth, folks. Building on kind of like all of the innovation, the technology, I gather that there's kind of like another generation or a new build of the Coraline puppet. I guess we've got a video that we can kind of...
We do have a video, and just, we're just restoring the 3D. We've had to restore these puppets. She's, the movie's 15 years old. Well, she's like 17 years old. So we've actually, we've taken a lot of our new technology. We've taken the idea that we're now using ZBrush and Maya to do our sculpts. We're now doing AutoCAD for our armature designs. And we've recreated Coraline, but we've made sure that she attains everything that was original about her. So we haven't changed her at all, but we have changed some of the processes. And we wanted something that we could kind of, or wanted a Coraline that we could use for the next 15 years. She wasn't going to break down. The materials, the foam latexes weren't going to crumble when we moved their legs and things like that. So we've made a group of new Coralines, and we have a little movie to watch.
Her faces are still the same, though. They're the same original faces. And that was an interesting thing, because as the technology has evolved, if we were to try to take Coraline's model and then print it in one of these newer 3D printers, she would look different. She'd have a different quality to her face, and we wanted to stay true to that. So she did not get a facelift. They're the original faces.
All right, let's take a look at this
go
video.
Watch it.
All of her shavings under the raincoat, those are kind of like retired materials, so we do have to find something else.
There's some custom stuff that we do not have, and we do not have the ability to remake, but it all depends on how close I can squeeze some joints together.
So we may explore just doing it in our current technique.
Just go for it.
We will strive to be as exacting as possible, because that's who we are.
rompers and raincoat?
Oh, when you turn and daily miss over. Oh, when you turn and daily miss a dream.
Thank you for bringing that. I don't think we can ever get enough of seeing kind of like the behind the scenes. It's just incredible the amount of work that goes into it. And that was on your first project. I know that it's just scaled up incredibly since then. I can't wait to see Wildwood. Now, no conversation about Coraline would be complete. Well, I'm sure plenty of conversations have happened without, but we have a special treat for you. The animation legend himself, director of Coraline, is at Annecy. He's going to join us up here for the you've probably figured this out with the empty chair, right? That wasn't for Coraline. Here's Henry Selick.
Thank you. Thanks. Is this working?
It is,
You hear
yes.
me?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
What would you like to know that I could add?
So has there been anything that's ever that's been bugging you for 15 years that you could also tweak in this sort of remastering process, or is this it's really stayed true to your vision? Like, how does what we're going to see tonight compare to what we saw 15 years ago?
Yeah, I saw the remastered version about a week and a half ago at great facility with perfect projection and sound. And it very much is what it represents the original dream of how to use the 3D really well. The reason the 3D happened was because I knew the inventor of the system that went into use, this guy, Lenny Lipton. He was a wonderful, funny genius of a guy. He also wrote the words to Puff the Magic Dragon when he was 19, and the money from that helped fuel some of his scientific adventures. But I was always checking in with Lenny to see the latest on his 3D technology, and close to when Coraline was maybe going to happen, I visited him and he showed me. And he said, I've sold this to Real D, one of the first companies that would ultimately put the projectors into all the theaters. And I just felt this was what was missing in the storytelling. I wanted there to be a Wizard of Oz moment, going from a black and white world into a world of color. Well, for Coraline, she could go from a sort of a flattened gray world into this beautiful world of color and depth and dimension, which ultimately would turn dangerous, and then things would start poking the audience. So seeing the remastered version just took that original concept to a greater height, and it's gorgeous.
And was there anything though that you talk about artifacts, things like that, but is there anything that I know we've heard it multiple times, you just kind of have to abandon at a certain point a shot or a thing and move on. I mean, it's like the people like Francis Ford Coppola never stop editing their movies. George Lucas keeps tweaking. I mean, it's like this would be the moment, or I don't know that there's an imperfection.
I am not going to point out the very few things that I still feel need some work on. Because they're so minor, they won't make a difference for the audience. But I'll have a discussion with you guys. And it was the original material, the range of what we could capture 15 years ago digitally. It's not nearly what you can do now in terms of whites getting blown out, losing detail in blacks. But no, there's nothing that hurts the film. Nothing that's been added hurt the film at all. It's only improved, and it really was meant to be seen in 3D. Back then, the glasses were extra dark. The projection was extra dark. I believe we've got much better projection here for the screening. There's 2 screenings here at Annecy, and it's so much a part of the story that, you know, I've gotten used to seeing Coraline in 2D over the years because that's usually how it's seen, and it looks fine. But 3D, nothing looks better in 3D than stop motion because it's real objects being photographed. Most of you wouldn't have heard of these things called Viewmaster slides. They were around for years and years. You'd put in a little wheel, and it had stereoscopic images of whatever it might be, Fred Flintstone, nature scenes, and they were magic. You'd look at them with two eyes, and you're in a whole world. And that's what we did with Coraline, you know, times 1,000.
You know, it's interesting. You really were there at the ground level, you know, with Phil Knight, Travis Knight at Laika, and you know, we're so much a part of the DNA and the you know, sense of the studio. But then you went on, you know, sort of to work elsewhere. We've kind of heard the Laika side of, you know, how they built on the innovations of Coraline. How did you take that experience? Because I'm sure, you know, you had these visions, but the Laikans, the people in that studio, kind of really scaled these impossible mountains to enact that, and then you could kind of take that with you onto subsequent projects. Would you just say a little bit about kind of what the way that Laika blew the doors open for you going forward?
Yeah, I've been involved with several other projects since then. You know, one of which I did for Netflix, came out a year and a half ago, called Wendell and Wild. The thing is, I was never more spoiled than I was at Laika. I got support there like nobody's business. Only twice in my life have I had that kind of support, on Nightmare Before Christmas and at Laika, where nobody was saying, no, we don't need that. No, we don't believe in that. There was always this, you know, if you had the passion and could convince people, and it wasn't hard, then they were going to support that. So the other projects, what I mainly would try to take, and it was what was intended in Coraline, was I really wanted it to still look like a handmade film in the most obvious way as possible. I'm not against using CG wherever it's necessary for stop motion. But, for example, the people who know the film Coraline, there's a whole theater full of Scotty dogs, and it would have made sense on so many levels to use CG for them, but I convinced people, no, it will not be the same, it won't look as good, or the Jumping Mouse Circus. Again, do it in CG. No, we did it with replacement animation. A lot of the effects outdoors, clouds shifting and on and on and on. I'm just a believer that wherever you can, make it handmade, but use it really well. Don't like hit people over the head with clumsiness. Make it as magical and invisible as you can. But since then, I've also had to shoot against blue screens, create backgrounds in post. It just became a question of economics. So the one thing I'll always hold on to is if you're going to do stop motion, make sure it still feels like it, because it can cross a line and occasionally look like CG. On the other hand, it can be so crude that unless you've got an incredibly, an amazing story or a raunchy story, you know, something like South Park, they hit that formula of the cutest, sweetest, simplest little cutout characters saying the most foul things. That you know, for me, there's always a dance. Invite the audience in. They have to believe in the movie for it to be real, which means they have to get past some of the flaws and so forth. Don't just like bathe them in the perfect film that is then disposable.
It seems to me, speaking to the three of you, that, like, you know, Henry really made an impact on the studio, though. I mean, obviously there was a real kindred sensibility, but you know, I think we can see the way that Henry's aesthetic has kind of carried on into other things. I mean, are there things that you can point to, maybe ideas that he pushed you on in Coraline that have influenced others? You know, maybe things that you weren't able to do quite yet, that Henry might have asked for.
Something they wouldn't necessarily answer, but I will take credit for. I had a big hand in getting Paranorman made Paranorman. I got the script to Phil Knight. He was paying for everything. Convinced him and supported Chris Butler, and helped sort of set in motion the next project.
Yeah.
But I think as far as official Laika history, though, there's no more Henry after that.
I mean, on Paranorman, we were faced with like this kind of logistic problem of this witch cloud, but we definitely wanted to take the handmade nature of our films into what we were going to produce, and I think it's been a real trademark of ours to do these kind of like motion maquettes, to do a lot of research, to shoot a lot of kind of examples for any digital team so they can produce something that's harmonious with the stop motion. So it doesn't look out of place, that it's all based on real fabrics or all based on real kind of techniques that we would use. And we do that up until present day. And that's a real challenge for our digital team, but it makes it authentic when you're watching the movie.
I think the digital team also really appreciates having their work grounded in the physical, artifacts. I think that's a definite legacy from Coraline and from Henry Selick that there's this desire to get it in camera, to get it on the stage, to use a physical element wherever possible. But we're constantly pushing up against those boundaries of how do you tell the story that you want to tell. And we have developed a hybrid approach to filmmaking, but it's always grounded in these handmade crafts.
I mean, what you said is true. Did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to add, it's not a hyperbole to say that I wouldn't have a career in stop motion without this man over here. It's true.
And you're not the only one.
He's really good.
Yeah.
But the job that I do doesn't make any sense. The fact that we are animating faces in the computer months ahead of the body being animated is backwards. Everyone else, whether it's CG or 2D, you sketch out the body, you block out the body, and then you add the facial animation on top. We do it backwards. And people often say, well, why do you do it? It must be quicker. Well, no, it's not. Well, it must save money. No, it doesn't save money. Well, you must need less people. No. They're trying to find logical reasons why this makes sense, and they can't come to any logical conclusion. The only reason is because it helps tell the story, and it helps push the characters in a new direction. And that's all because of Henry and his vision of trying to push that boundary on Coraline. And once that seal was broken, no director wanted to go back. So, thank you.
Yeah, I would add that stop motion, it's it can sometimes be hard. If stop motion before Coraline, facial animation, it's done by animating clay, moving for new positions like Aardman animation, Wallace and Gromit, and so forth, or mechanical with joints and things underneath a rubber face you shift around, and they could be effective to a point. And then there's the replacement, which with Jack Skellington, he's a ping pong ball with 2 holes for eyes and a mouth. You change the entire head, so it was like a starting point. But with Coraline, we exploded that simple idea into something really rich and complicated. We came up with the idea, well, we better split the face, because if we're not replacing the entire face for every little minute change, that will give us greater flexibility. But in the end, it wasn't a way to limit us. It was a way to really explode the creativity. And I just remember screening the film for people from CG. People from Pixar saw a lot of the film when I was doing the sound work. They were blown away. They said, we'd never seen stop motion where you really believe the characters were alive. And, with Brian's help and Laika supporting it, that's what I think I helped bring with Laika to what stop motion can be, a range of emotions and believability that had never been seen before.
I mean, the fact that we can now get such nuance and such subtlety out of the faces really kind of change the game for everything that we do. And so even the body performances, because we can get this out of the face, we don't have to pantomime the story with, gestures from hands and things like that. So we can actually do a lot more subtle animation, which has kind of raised the bar all over the studio in terms of rigs and kind of making sure that the tools that we give to our animators, they can now create subtle performances that are more believable, that are more authentic and have a lot more emotion instead of just telling us the beats of the story, which I think has been a really boom.
Yeah, there's really so much personality in the character. I also love, I think it's your aesthetic, Henry, but it really kind of combats the digital aspect. If there's something, I think, in the human brain that resists computers to an extent, so like all of the great computer animation almost has to overcome that hurdle. It's, what the Uncanny Valley and all these things are based on. It's something you sensed with, I think, a movie like Pirates, the Aardman movie, which is so brilliant in so many ways, but is that fusion, and you look at it now, and it doesn't have the 100 years later look. Like, you can tell what was CG, where at the time it might have been invisible to the eye. We're becoming so sophisticated, but I'm thinking of like the asymmetry of Coraline and the top heaviness of characters and all these kind of things that kind of like are almost counterintuitive to something that would be digital. And I think that comes out of, you've had a career-long legacy of films that has kind of led to this and carried on from it. But I almost feel like no other artist could have launched Laika to success the way you did. And you kind of set the studio on its way, and it allowed you to level up in what you were doing. I don't know how you build on flattery.
Right place, right time. And, I asked Phil Knight early on. I didn't even know about Travis and his genius yet. But Phil, why are you getting into animation? He didn't explain. Well, I've got a son who's a genius, and he just. And I said, and what do you want out of it? He said, well, I want to win. and I took that as a really open-ended thing.
To be the best, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I saw the winning as, and that's what I found at Laika was a place that would take crazy risks, and with the belief in the lucky individual at the time, those all the chances paid off. And something I've said about stop motion, it's not all stop motion, but the best stop motion films have a longer life than any other type of film because it's ancient magic. It's the first magic of filmmaking. The first trick films were forms of stop motion. Maybe it's just having a chair magically move across the floor, 120 years ago. So you're not, even though there's nothing but great innovation to steadily improve it and expand the worlds and the types of stories that can be told, the underlying magic of an animator breathing life directly through their hands into a puppet. It's so old, it doesn't get old. It's already in the magical realm. It doesn't have to earn its place there. And as long as you avoid too many topical bits of humor, too many gizmos of the moment that don't date well, I think the best stop motion will continue to have this timeless quality.
Yeah, well said. And I think it's something that you have, through your career, you've sometimes been the only or one of the only people practicing this. Obviously, Aardman, a few others, but it's like what Laika has done. The fact that you've stuck to it has just. I'm sure there are people in this room who are practitioners of stop motion, obviously lovers of it, but this medium has been able to continue and expand and evolve through what you've all done. A mere 15 years ago or 20, if you love Coraline, this is just the beginning of your chance to sort of enjoy her and Henry at the festival. Henry will be doing a master class in about an hour. Coraline will be showing tonight and again later in the festival. Thank you for coming. Let's hear it for our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming.